What is up everybody, Dak here, and today it's how to design a speaker enclosure part 2. In the first video I talked about how to find the right volume and port dimensions for an enclosure. Today I'm going to be talking about how to turn that volume into a three-dimensional space which is surrounded with wood and the dimensions of the sheets of wood and how to cut them and things like that. First off, I'm going to be starting with a simple box. The simplest box you can do is just a sealed box. For this example, it's going to be 100 litres internal volume. And for the example, I'm going to be using an 18-inch driver. When I put the specs of the 818D into WinISD, I get this curve right here with a volume of 123.64 litres. Now, of course, 5 significant figures, doesn't matter. You can do pretty well 124 litres if you round it up. But just to make it easier to understand, 100 litres is very similar, and you can see this pink curve here rather than the yellow one. It's quite similar, so 100 litres for the demonstration. It's not a bad compromise. Now, 3 things that you need to consider with a sealed speaker enclosure, which is the diameter of the driver, which is the cutout diameter and the total outside diameter of the speaker, the depth of the speaker, so when you mount it into the box, how deep the driver goes inside the box, and the displacement. If you were to put the speaker in a bucket and fill it with water, how much volume of, say, a 10 litre bucket would be taken up with water, say 8 litres and 2 litres for the driver. Now, for this first one, I'm going to be keeping it super simple and just ignoring displacement, just going off driver diameter and depth, as these things are crucial for finding an enclosure. Now, the first tip, this might be rather controversial, but I always design my speaker enclosures using decimeters. I really like to use them because when you multiply them together, they go straight to litres. So 3 decimeters by 4 decimeters by 5 decimeters, 12 by 5, 60 decimeters cubed, which is 60 litres. So 30 by 40 by 50 centimeters is 60 litres. 1 decimeter also converts nicely into imperial. It's about 4 inches. So yeah, a decimeter is 1/10 of a meter or 10 centimeters. So our goal for the enclosure is 100 litres. Now here's just some different sizes and shapes that we could go with. 5 by 5 by 4 gets us right to 100. 4.6 cube gets us just below 97.3. 7 by 7 by 2, 98, 108, 102. Now for our example driver, which is the DD818D, it's a 45 centimeter diameter and a 30 centimeter depth. So if we plug those in, we can see that 5 by 5 by 4 decimeters. This is, by the way, 4.5 decimeters by 3 decimeters. 5 by 5 by 4, where it doesn't fit the 4.5 decimeter diameter on the 5 by 4 plane, but it does on the 5 by 5. And at 40 centimeters deep, it's got plenty of space for the driver. So it is good. You can check that one. Next one, 4.6 cube. 4.6 is greater than the 4.5, and it's got plenty of depth for the magnet, so this one also works. Now, next one, you can probably already see. 7 by 7 by 2. So 7 by 7, while that will fit the driver on it, 20 centimeters of depth is not enough for the magnet. So this one's an X. There is the option that you could mount the driver with the magnet hanging out of the box, but that's covered in another video, and I do feel that it's less professional. You'll probably want to mount your driver inside the enclosure. Now next one, 6 by 6 by 3. So this will fit it on the face, and this one should fit it depth-wise, right? Yeah, but no. So for this one, due to it being 30 centimeters, which is right on the limit for the driver, it's very possible that the driver's vents that are in the back of the magnet could be blocked by the back of the enclosure. So you'll want to try to avoid this. Now it could also work if, say, you're double baffling. Say 40mm thick baffle, that would space it 40mm off the back of the enclosure, which would be okay. So this is quite close, so you're really going to have to be careful with that. and the next one very obviously won't fit. The driver diameter won't fit on any of these sides. Now the next tip I'm going to give is the more cubic the box, the more material efficient it is. A very long rectangular box or a very flat box tends to be more material intensive, whereas if it's more cubic, it's more material efficient. If you think of a sphere, has the largest internal volume compared to its outside area. So the more an enclosure looks like a sphere, the more efficient it is. Wide planes do not look like a sphere at all. The most spherical, easy shape is a cube. So going back to this, we can also see that the two that worked also were more spherical. The cube one worked very well. This one up here though, being 100 liters on the dot, I'm going to be using this one for the example. So here we can see 50 by 50 centimeters on this face here, 40 centimeters deep. If we were to add a plane of wood to the back of it, we can see that we need an overhang on every side. For this example, by the way, I'm going to be using 2 centimeter thick wood. So that's 20 millimeters or 0.2 decimeters. That also makes it a lot easier. I know a lot of woods aren't 2 centimeters thick. They're often 3/4 inch or 18 mil or other numbers like that. 21 millimeter is another thickness, but for this one, 2 centimeters makes the maths a lot easier, but it is something that you've got to take into account when designing your own box. So I'm using 2 centimeter thick wood. Now for this, it needs to overhang 2 centimeters on the top and the front and the bottom and the rear. So 2 centimeters on every one means just 4 centimeters total. So if I were to push this back to the corner, the 2 bottom and top add up to 4, the 2 front and back add up to 4. So it's 4 centimeters on all sides for the first side. If we were to use a double baffle, which is a fairly popular construction technique, which is where the face that the driver's mounted into is just 2 sheets of wood thick, then you would add 2 centimeters for that plane. But for this example, it's just going to be a very simple box with the same thickness on every side. So it's 4 centimeters wider on every side. It ends up being 54 centimeters by 44 centimeters by 54 centimeters total. And once again, this 4 centimeters and 2 centimeters is because my wood thickness is 2 centimeters. If yours was 3/4 inch or 18 millimeters, this would be 3.6 centimeters, and this would be 1.8 centimeters. So the first 2 sides are going to be the complete added side size of the enclosure, 54 by 54 centimeters. Now, because this enclosure is simple and is symmetrical, it has 2 faces the exact same size. So 54 by 54 centimeter squares. If you were double baffling, you would have 3 of these, unless you were to double baffle on another face. But with the 18-inch driver, it would be on one of these faces, as it doesn't fit in the top, bottom, or the front or the back. For these 2, because we've got 2 centimeters of thickness on the edge here, it ends up being 54 high by 44, which was the total width, minus the 4 centimeters that we get on the edges. So it's 40, which is the original width of the box, right? So we've gone from big overhang to medium overhang, and next up is no overhang. This is 50 by 40 centimeters and is just the original area of the top of the box. And this is once again top and bottom. So we end up with 2 sides 54 by 54, 2 sides 54 by 40, and 2 sides 50 by 40. Once again, this is because of the thickness of my material in the example. You'd have to calculate your own. Now for a double baffle, once again, it's either a 54 by 44 on this side or a 54 by 54 on this side. Now the third tip is plywood greater than MDF. I know a lot of people say that MDF is damper, it's denser, it's heavier, but I find that plywood is just a superior material. For one thing, it's lighter for its strength. If what you want is the kind of damping effect MDF has, you can just have more or thicker plywood Now what that will do is increase its resonance, but for a subwoofer that does not matter. It's already going to be resonating probably in the couple hundred hertz mark, so you can add the thickness. So instead of using 18mm MDF, you can use 24 or 25mm plywood, which is, say, about the same dent or about the same weight, but the plywood will be stronger. So I find that plywood is just generally a superior material. They also do have similar damping characteristics. It's just the plywood, being stiffer, has a higher resonance and is often more noticeable. So here we have our sheet of 20mm plywood, for example. We can see these are all the dimensions marked out. We've got 54 by 40 times 2. We've got 50 by 40 times 2. We've got 54 by 54 times 2. And this extra 54 by 44 is if I was to do the double baffle on this side. If it was on this side though, then it would be a bit bigger. So this is what we've got. Now for the cutting list, how I would cut this myself is, first I would measure up 40 centimeters and I'd cut this entire strip off the sheet of wood. This sheet of wood, by the way, is 1.2 by 2.4 meters, or roughly 4 by 8 feet to scale. Next, what I'd do is get the circular saw, measure up 54 centimeters, and cut to this point here, which is either 3 times 54 or 2 times 54 plus 44 along, plus about 15 or 20 millimeters due to the width of the blade. Next, what I would do is I would measure 54 centimeters, cut, measure 54 centimeters, cut, measure 50, cut, measure 50, cut. I measure and cut each one after I do the previous one, in order to make sure that the thickness of the blade doesn't have any effect at all on the preceding cut. After this, I would then cut up in a sequence, once again taking 54 centimeters off at a time. After I do the cut, then I do the next measurement. Now another option is you could just cut all the way up and then cut across. This one just saves a bit of measurement and also hopefully gets you a bit more uniform excess wood. If you ever need a big long bit of wood, then this is a better way of having usable scrap. Now another thing you could do with all this scrap is you could do internal bracing and 45 degrees, as well as internal baffling. Internal bracing is a good way of getting an enclosure just that bit stiffer. So once again, if it's a choice of plywood with internal bracing or MDF without, for being the same mass, I would highly recommend plywood with an internal bracing. Whenever weight is a factor, plywood. If not, sure, MDF, it's cheaper, but it is also weaker, so you've got to take that into account. I do consider, I've only built a couple boxes out of MDF and it's not blown me away with mystical sound quality properties, so that's my opinion on that. So all this excess here you can use into internal bracing or even baffling. If the speaker enclosure is playing higher frequencies, such as in the couple kilohertz region, what you can do is, to avoid echoing the box, you can put just odd angled sheets of wood that behind the driver that scatter the waves, in order to avoid standing waves occurring, which are basically when the waves bounce around in the box in such a way that creates cancellation. If you can put internal baffling in that spreads the waves out, it means that they don't arrive back at the driver in a big group and create a dip in the response or a peak in it. Really evens it out. Very easy way to improve sound quality in a box. And if you already have peaks and troughs, you could try putting some baffling inside. It can often work just as good as internal sound absorbing material, and is good to work with alongside internal sound absorbing material. And that concludes part 2 of how to design a speaker enclosure. Part 3 will include more information about ported enclosures as well as ob-shaped enclosures. Originally this was just going to be one solid video, but it got to about 50 minutes long, so I decided to just split it up into several more parts. If you enjoyed, subscribe to make sure that you see the next 2 parts of the video. Like if you enjoyed, and comment if you've got any other input. Thanks for watching, see ya.